Welcome, my dear students, to the summary of Middlemarch, our outline story. In this story, first of all, I would like to recommend you to just focus the main 4 characters in this novel. So, the first character is Dorothea Brooke. Second character is Fred Vincy. Okay. And third character is Eliot, Dr. Eliot. And the next character is Nicholas Bulstrode. So let's get back to Dorothea Brooke. This is Dorothea Brooke's family. Celia Brooke is her sister, and her unmarried uncle, a bachelor. His name is Arthur Brooke, or Mr. Brooke. They live at Tipton Grange, near Middlemarch. So, as Dorothea Brooke was attracted by 2 other characters. One is Mr. Casaubon. Second is Sir James Chatham, or Mr. James. Rather, Dorothea Brooke married Mr. Casaubon after accepting the marriage proposal of Mr. Casaubon easily. Mr. Casaubon's young cousin's name was Will Ladislaw. He was not happy with the marriage of Dorothea Brooke and Mr. Casaubon. So finally, Mr. Casaubon invited these 3 characters, Arthur Brooke, Dorothea Brooke, and Celia Brooke, to his home. We have one more character who comes to Middlemarch when Mr. Casaubon and Dorothea Brooke were traveling to Italy. He came to Middlemarch and finally fell in love with Rosamond Vincy, who was the sister of Fred Vincy. So Dr. Eliot was a poor doctor, and he wanted to make some beneficial changes in his hospital. He was the head of that hospital, and he has great expectations from Nicholas Bulstrode, so he got involved in the local politics. Fred Vincy was in a large debt, and he expected an inheritance from Peter Featherstone, or Mr. Featherstone, when he dies, actually. In Rome, Ladislaw encountered Dorothea had begun to realize too late how pompous and incompatible she found Casaubon. Seeing her unhappiness, Will Ladislaw, first pitied and then fell in love with his cousin's wife. He fell in love with his cousin's wife, Dorothea, in Rome. When Fred Vincy got ill, Dr. Eliot took care of him. Finally, Mr. Casaubon and Dorothea Brooke came back from Rome, and they found Celia's and Mr. James' engagement. After this episode, Will Ladislaw created a close connection to Dorothea Brooke, who is his cousin's wife, and it followed their quarrel between each other. And after this, Mr. Casaubon got ill, and someday he had also the heart attack. After this, Will Ladislaw created a close connection to Casaubon's wife, Dorothea, and someday they also fought with each other. And this episode was followed by Casaubon's severe illness, and he got a heart problem as well. When Peter Featherstone was on his deathbed, he wanted to give his fortune to Mary Gath, who loved Fred Vincy since her childhood. Rather, Mary Gath refused to take it up. So finally, Featherstone offered his fortune to his illegitimate son, whose name was Joshua Rigg Featherstone. After this, Mr. Casaubon died, and he wrote a codicil to give his property to Dorothea Brooke, his wife, as long as she did not marry Will Ladislaw. During this episode, Mr. Brooke, having gone into politics with the help of Ladislaw, published a liberal newspaper, but finally he cut off his relationship with Mr. Ladislaw on the advice of his Tory friends. Meanwhile, Dr. Legett married Rosamond Menzies, and Dr. Legett was in a large debt, so that he could not even furnish his house. When he found that his income did not meet his wife's spendthrift habits, he asked her to help him economize. Even they quarreled with each other. A new, disreputable character came to Middlemarch. He knows that Will Ladislaw's grandfather has a lot of fortune as a receiver of stolen goods, that Nicholas Bulstrode, the highly respected banker, had once been confidential clerk of Ladislaw's ancestors. More than that, Bulstrode's first wife had been his employer's widow. You must remember one more thing here: the money of Ladislaw's ancestors. We should go to Ladislaw's mother. Bulstrode had made his own fortune, already blackened by Mr. Raffles, and Mr. Bulstrode was offering that Mr. Raffles would tell the whole story to Will Ladislaw. So finally, Mr. Ladislaw has nothing in his fortune, so he decided to leave Middlemarch and went to meet Dorothea. He considers that Dorothea loved him. Rather, Mr. Legett, Dr. Legett, drifted deeper into debt. And finally, he decided to sell most of the valuable things on cheaper rates. And in the meanwhile, Mr. Bulstrode lost his interest in the new hostel and withdrew his financial support. Dr. Legett went to Nicholas Bulstrode, who was a banker even, just for a loan. He was in a big debt. Rather, Bulstrode suggested him to go to Dorothea Brooke for financial support. So finally, what happened? When Mr. Raffles finally came to Middlemarch and Dr. Legett went to meet him, having a faith of support from Mr. Raffles, Nicholas Bulstrode was again afraid about the story of their ancestors, as I already mentioned. So he gave a check to Dr. Legett, the check of £1,000, the charge of his mind, in order to hide the story of their ancestors. So finally, Dr. Legett got the loan to save his goods and reputation. Raffles died. So Bulstrode felt at peace at last. Bulstrode was now satisfied with all the situation. Now we go again to Rosamond Menzies. She decided to leave the Middlemarch to avoid public disgrace, as in now that they both were captured in a long debt. You must also remember that Bulstrode's secret was revealed by Mr. Raffles when he came to Middlemarch, nearing village, and that time he was in a drunken state. He was just drunken, So he disclosed his secret, and he was just afraid to leave the town. He was afraid of public abuse, but his doctor didn't permit him to leave the town. But his doctor didn't permit him to leave the place because he got so much ill. Dorothea Brooke had a great sympathy with Dr. Eliot, and at the same time, Dorothea Brooke advised Rosamund Vincy not to leave the Middlemarch in order to save Dr. Eliot from any consequences, as he was in a big debt, and she advised Rosamund Vincy to give full support to Dr. Eliot in the times of trouble. After this episode, Rosamund Vincy got involved with religious law. Other religious law always liked Dorothea Brooke, as I already told you. But when Dorothea Brooke forced Rosamund Vincy to return to Eliot's house on the following morning, Rosamund told Dorothea Brooke of religious law declaration. You must remember that Dorothea Brooke realized that she was unwilling to give up Casaubon's fortune for Ladislaw's affection. In spite of the protests of her family and friends, they were married several weeks later and went to live in London. Eliot and Rosamund lived together with better understanding and prospects of a happy future. Brother Fred Vincy and Mary Grath were engaged, with whom he had been long in love for a long time. Dorothea's family disregarded her, but they were finally reconciled after Dorothea's son was born, and Ladislaw was elected to Parliament.